This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there and welcome to the show. Look, I know there's a lot of confusing stuff going on. More happens in the course of a week than used to happen in a decade. But I've got my friend Eric Peters joining me today. We're going to try to make sense out of it. Eric, how are you?
Well, I'm good, and I'm ruminating over the loss of Trump's hair, so to speak, and that he has been shorn Delilah-like, having lost what was probably the most effective weapon that he had in this contest that's going on now, by which of course I mean the withdrawal of the senile man, the old man, which now draws attention to the fact that Trump is also an old man. And, I hope for the best, but I'm planning for the worst.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the Kamala mania that has sprung up over the last week or so. I mean, is Joe Biden even around anymore? I don't, it seems like all the attention is focused on her, as if she is the heir apparent and merely, we have a couple of formalities to go through before she's installed as president.
What sure looks like that. It looks like all they have to do at this point is tie the proverbial shoelaces. It seems that she's the fait accompli nominee. Of course, Biden at this point is now irrelevant. He may nominally be the president, but who cares what he has to say about anything? Because no matter what happens, he's not going to be president in 4 months or so. So, that's why it bothers me that Trump continues to talk about Biden, because he is irrelevant. And it's time to start focusing not so much on Kamala per se, but on her policies. And the thing that I worry about is that he's going to attack her personally. And I think that the possibility, if he does that, is that he's going to alienate a lot of women who already don't particularly like Trump, and even potentially a lot of men and others who are sick and tired of all this personal attacking and just want to hear about policies.
Yeah, you had an excellent article on Trump's dementia, and people who take offense at that really should read the article first so they understand where you're coming from. But, the same things that were being used as a liability against Biden, now Trump is kind of in a position where those same things, he's old and, he may not be up to the job. That's all being turned against him now.
Well, and it's valid. As long as Biden was still in the race, the obviously senile, obviously decrepit Biden, it was easy to focus on that, and it was easy for Trump to whack that very, very easy to hit pinata. But with him gone, now, he's lost that cover because he himself is also an old man. And while at this moment he's reasonably vigorous, so it seems, the fact is he's 78 years old. And that means he's just as old as Biden was around the time of the 2020 election. And as anybody who's familiar with this topic knows, none of us can avoid the consequences of aging. And God only knows what he's going to be like, assuming he wins, let's say, in a year or two. He could be a feeble old man and suffering from Parkinson's and dementia within 2 years. And I don't say that to mock him. I'm just saying that as somebody who understands what happens inevitably as we start to reach the 80th decade of our lives.
No kidding. It's, there was a time going into that first debate, which it's questionable how early that was held in the first place, but okay. Yep. So going into that, it seemed like, Trump clearly has the upper hand. And somehow, and I can't explain exactly how, it feels like that dynamic has now shifted.
It does. And, something I think that people on our side, generally speaking, should be cognizant of is to be careful to not make the mistake that other people, meaning particularly people on the other side of the aisle, look at things the way that we do. We look at cackling Kamala and see a DEI hire who's out of her depth, who's inarticulate, who cackles like a shrieking termagant. On the other hand, she is a person of color, and she is a woman. And therefore, she punches most of the buttons that people on the emotionally incontinent left love. You remember when Barack Obama appeared out of nowhere, and we on our side would say, well, who is this guy? He's a one-term senator. He has no record. What's his CV for being president? Because we're applying rational standards to the thing. They don't care. She punches the buttons, and it's really foolish, I think, if we go around saying, Kamala Harris is a diversity hire. She's only there because she's a woman and she's incompetent. That's going to be fatal. It's going to cause Trump to lose, in my opinion.
Well, as a good friend of mine put it, what you're saying is absolutely true. And I tend to look at the word salads that she throws out there every so often, and I think, oh my gosh, how are we going to translate this into English? But it's the people, it's the machine behind her that we cannot underestimate.
Yep, they covered for Biden for almost 4 years, very effectively, and created a sort of Praetorian guard of lies around him that was essentially impossible to penetrate. They're going to do the same for her. And all that they need to do, in my opinion, is to close the gap. Before they got rid of Biden, Trump appeared to be in possession of a significantly sizable lead, and that's been his strategy all along. It is to have the margin be great enough that they won't credibly be able to claim that the other guy won, right? Well, now the other guy is gone, and if they can bring it within the margin of error, then it's very easy to shift a few votes here and there and toss the election in favor of Kamala. And then if anybody questions it, obviously you must be a misogynist and a racist.
And let's talk a little bit about the pivot that the press has made, because just a couple of weeks ago, these were the same people assuring us that Biden is fit and totally okay, and there's nothing wrong with him, and he's as good as he's ever been. Sharp as a tack, I believe, was the phrase that they were told to say, and they've turned on a dime, and now they're telling us that Kamala is the answer to all of our prayers.
Well, they pivot seamlessly, and Orwell, I think, was the first to document this phenomenon when he wrote 1984 back in 1948. There's a great scene in the novel where a crowd is gathered to listen to a party orator speak, and somebody hands the party orator a note, and in mid-sentence, the topic is changed from being at war with East Asia to being at war with Eurasia. And it sort of immediately percolates through the crowd that that's the new orthodoxy. And that's how these people operate. They literally get their talking points, and they turn around and they recite them, and that's exactly what they're paid to do.
Well, and it's so blatant. And I'll give you an example. You and I had mentioned this before going on the air. If you try to Google Trump assassination attempt, it's memory hold. That stuff is disappearing. The press has dropped it. In fact, there's been questions, well, maybe it was faked, and maybe it wasn't even a bullet that hit him and so forth. And it's astonishing to me how quickly that is being erased from the public consciousness.
Well, it isn't to me, because I think it's imperative that they do that, because it created sympathy and mojo for the orange man, right? And that's the last thing that they want, is sympathy and mojo for the orange man. So, let's shift gears and talk about something else. Let's talk about Kamala Harris, whatever it happens to be that prevents us from talking about that. And I think that's the reason why they have done their best to just kind of shunt that off the stage, if you will.
Yeah, I think there's a demoralization campaign that comes from this as well. And it's not just, the presidential politics. I look at the opening ceremonies for the Olympics, and there is a whole disinformation campaign out there that, pardon my pseudo French here, but it's meant to screw with our heads. It's meant to leave us.
And I also think there's something at work that's kind of analogous to what happened after JFK was assassinated. I think they're very assiduously working to create, and I'm going to put it in capital letters, the official report, the narrative, and to cement that in people's minds so that what actually happened cannot be questioned. And if anybody does question it, of course, they're going to be conspiracy theorists, just as anybody who questioned the official narrative of the Warren Report was framed as a conspiracy theorist, a kook, somebody who is marginal and shouldn't be paying attention to.
Well, so let's take a moment here. We've got about a couple minutes here before we have to take a quick break. How do you keep your sanity in a world where basically most of the media is intended to keep you off balance, uncertain, and confused?
Well, me personally, I do things like hit the gym and hit the weights. I go for a run, or I jump on one of my motorcycles and I go for a fast ride. That usually clears my head and makes me feel better.
I think that's a great. I think that's a great way to deal with the stress. What about keeping your mind, keeping from being sucked into the narratives? I'm just curious, how do you maintain that sense of healthy skepticism?
Well, actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because something that I do when I need a reboot is to get a good book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, whether it's history or just a novel, something that's well written and thoughtful. And I plop myself on the sofa, or I go out and sit outside if it's nice out and read that. And that calms me, and it centers me, and it helps me to think better. I don't know whether that's helpful, but that's what I do.
I like that suggestion. In fact, there's a part of me that really looks forward to the day when the EMP hits, or the solar flare or whatever, and electricity goes out long term, and I have time to read. Sorry, I'm channeling Burgess Meredith here.
And speaking of that, really, it's important, to get hard copies of the classic works of literature and history and so on, because they are already beginning to systematically purge those things and alter the text. So don't rely on online digitized copies of these things as from Kindle. Get the hard copy so you have that book so that you can read it and perhaps pass it on to your kids, and their kids can have it from their kids.
Hear, hear. All right, we've got to take a very quick break. I'm talking with Eric Peters from ericpetersautos.com. We have much more to discuss when we return on the other side of this break. Again, if you want to check out my show notes, go to thebryanhydeshow.com. I've dropped a link in there that will take you directly to Eric's website. If you haven't subscribed, well, consider doing so. It's not going to cost you anything. Every day that I do the show, I will send you a copy of the show notes, and you can check out the people I interview and check out the articles in question for yourself. Back in just a moment.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Welcome back to the show. Eric Peters from ericpetersautos.com is my guest. All right, Eric, I like to talk automotive things with you because I know you're on the cutting edge with your websites, and you comment on political things, but you also do a lot of automotive writing. You've introduced me to a phrase that I don't know much about here, but plug-in hybrid. That's the first time I'd heard that phrase was when you had written about it. Tell me about what that means.
Well, let me preface this by saying that engineers truly are amazing people in the sense that they're able to overcome truly daunting obstacles in their path. The government will issue a mandate or a regulation that appears to be impossible to comply with, and at the same time produce a product that might actually be appealing to the people who are going to buy it. And yet they do somehow. And this brings us to the plug-in hybrid. Okay, everybody's familiar with a hybrid car. Hybrid car has an engine, and it also has a battery, and some of them will also have a motor. And the idea is to cut the gas engine off as often as possible to save gas. The Toyota Prius is the archetypical hybrid. Well, the plug-in notches that up a little bit. Not only does the system allow the engine to be cut off, it allows the vehicle to be driven as an electric vehicle at highway speeds, typically for up to 20 to 30 miles. But with the advantage that when the battery runs low, the gas engine just kicks on and you can keep on going, and thereby eliminates the two big problems with the purely electric vehicle, those being short range and the long recharge time. So it's a solution to this problem that is presented by the electric vehicle. And that is exactly why the attacks on the plug-in hybrid are commencing. Michael Reagan, the current head of the EPA, is deriding the plug-in hybrid because people aren't plugging it in often enough. And of course they're not, because that's the whole point. They want to be able to drive. They don't want to have to sit there and wait. But the notciousness of it is that this thing, if you're going at this on an honest level, and if you accept the idea that, well, electric vehicles are necessary to combat climate change, well, here you go. Here's one that works. Most people don't drive more than 30 miles in a day. So here's a vehicle that you can generally drive using just the batteries. It should make the environmental nutcases happy, but it doesn't make them happy because it allows people to keep on driving. And that gets at what they really want, which is to get most of us out of the driver's seat.
Sorry. It's one of those things that it's like a mosquito in your room at night. It's an irritation that comes back and revisits from time to time, but never really goes away.
Yeah, well, you come to understand this when you examine, and this is just one issue of many, where reasonableness is not desired. A sensible balance between cost and benefit is not what's wanted. These are extreme policies designed to further a broader agenda. A good example that's non-automotive is this whole idea of zero COVID. Remember that? Where, it couldn't be abided that there was even one case anywhere. And in order to prevent that one case, they were willing to impose these draconian mandates upon an entire population. And then you have Vision Zero, which gets us back into the car world, where even one fatality of a pedestrian, let's say, is unacceptable. And therefore, every means and method must be used to prevent anybody from being killed as a result of being struck by a car. And obviously, the only way to do that in the end is to get rid of cars altogether.
Which you and I've discussed, that really seems to be kind of the green plan of, well, if we can just get people into these 15-minute cities, we do away with the need for their personal transportation, and wow, it's going to be great. We're going to save the planet, but, it will come at the cost of your freedom. But, that's a small price to pay for saving the planet, right?
Yeah, if you get into the nitty gritty of this, and I've been covering this professionally for more than 30 years now, and this goes back 50 years, even longer than I've been doing it, and you read their internal memos and documents, they hate cars. Or more finally, they hate the idea that the proletariat, people like you and I, have a car. And everything that's been going on for the past 50 years ultimately has been aiming at the end goal of eliminating private vehicle ownership and control over your vehicle. Only the controllers will have access to cars, and they might allow you to be driven around in an automated one, maybe, if you're a good little boy or girl and you've had all your vaccines and your social credit score is high.
Man, I don't like where this is headed. Not one bit.
Amen. And it's time people got angry. By the way, this atrocity that was on display at the Paris Olympics has got a lot of people angry. I love it. I love that these people, and they're all the same people, whether they're in France or in here, have pushed the envelope a little bit too far. Their hubris is going to prove to be their nemesis. They feel that they have achieved their goals, that they've won already. Of course, they haven't. And so they feel emboldened to shove the most nauseating things right in our faces. And people are finally saying, we've had enough of this.
Which is good, but it also spells a little bit of danger in the sense that when the people in power realize that, it's slipping away from us, what's the first thing they're going to want to do? Create a crisis.
Well, that's true. But, at the end of the day, all systems, even the most authoritarian ones, do depend on the passive compliance of the bulk of the population. And if a significant enough percentage of the population becomes ungovernable, then they become ungovernable. And we're rapidly, in my opinion, approaching that point because increasingly people feel as though they've got nothing left to lose because they understand there is an existential threat staring them and their families directly in the face.
Hear, hear. And I'm going to come back to a theme that you and I have talked about many times over the years. Self-reliance is one of the keys. Mm-hmm. The ability to say no when someone in authority says, but you have to. If you are self-reliant to the greatest degree that you can be, you still have options. You can say, no, thank you. Go peddle that somewhere else.
Yeah, normal people have an instinct to be, on the one hand, civil for other people, and they want to be cooperative because, that's actually how civilization is built, civility and cooperation. But we have come to understand that there is a cohort of people who are not civilized, who don't want to cooperate, who want to beat us into submission, and who want to make us do what they say, period. And it's time for us to say no to that. And the first thing that we have to do is to understand what we're dealing with. That is foundational. If we can understand it, we can defeat it.
Hear, hear. And I would also urge, don't be too concerned about, obeying the letter of the law. I'm not telling people go out there and, it's every man for himself, but understand that the law is only being used right now in ways that benefit those who are in power, not so much to protect you or your freedoms.
I agree with that. I think, if I were going to instruct a child right now, I would do my best to impart that just because something is legal doesn't mean it's right, and that there's a difference between law and morality. And what's important is whether a given action is morally right or morally wrong, rather than whether it's legal or illegal.
Yep. There was a quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, talked about how in totalitarian Russia, he basically said, your punishment, if you were found to have a knife when you were searched, would be very different from a thief who was found to be in possession of a knife. Because for him to have one, that was just mere misbehavior. That was tradition. He didn't know any better. But for you, a person who's thinking for themselves, that was terrorism. And the state treated it very differently.
A person who is attacked by a thug and who uses a gun to defend himself against a violent attack. Look at Kyle Rittenhouse. It's a perfect example.
Yep.
That person will be prosecuted, not the thug who initiated the violence.
Yep. And once in a while, Kyle was one of those rare cases where the jury stood up and said, okay, this is not going to fly. And it was fun to watch that case fall apart right in the face of that prosecutor. But think about for instance, the kids up in Spokane, Washington, who are facing years in prison because they left skid marks on a pride flag crosswalk with an electric scooter versus, say, the people who were tearing down flags and burning them and spray painting and defacing statues earlier in Washington, D.C. just last week.
Absolutely. And I think, again, to get back to what we were just talking about a moment ago, to shed the unearned mantle of unearned guilt around your shoulder. Don't feel bad about failing to obey immoral laws. In fact, feel good about standing up against immoral laws. Read Solzhenitsyn. He went at length about this dismissal of legalism, and instead focus on what's right and be prepared to stand up for it.
Yep. What did he say? Don't take part in the lie.
Yes, exactly.
Eric, great as always to visit with you. Here I am. I'm feeling encouraged once again. Like, yes, I can face the rest of the week. Thanks again for all that you do.
Likewise, Brian. Appreciate it.
All right. Again, that's Eric Peters from ericpetersautos.com. Check out my show notes for a link to his excellent website. We'll be back in just a couple of moments.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Welcome back to the show. Thank you again for joining us today. I don't know about you, but I am so grateful for the friends that I have in my life. And I want to say that, I got tons of friends everywhere I go. But no, you know what? The truth of the matter is there are a lot of people that I know and love and revere. But there's only a very small handful of friends that I consider to be kind of my lifeline to sanity. Let me explain what that means. When I get looking around or when I'm trying to make sense of all the craziness that's going on, there are just a few trusted voices out there that, if they call me or if they text me and say, hey, do you have a few minutes to talk? I will drop whatever I'm doing because I know that they are so firmly rooted in reality, firmly rooted in their faith, or just that their principles are such that whatever it is that they have to say, whatever it is that they want to talk about, I will make the time to visit with them. I really hope that makes sense. I don't want to sound like I am so elite and I only talk with the king of such and such, No, it's just that these are friends that I've known for a while, but their character is such that every time I have a conversation with them, I come away reassured that there are really good people out there, people who get it, rational voices of reason, if you will, that are doing their best to make sense of everything the same way that I'm trying to do my best. Now, I understand not everybody has, the option of, well, Brian, I'd reach out to you and gladly fill you in on the details if I could. I get it. It's not going to be tenable for everybody. But what I am suggesting is that every one of us needs a few friends like that, even one or two friends like that, can be the difference between feeling absolutely isolated, alone, or just simply like, am I the only one who sees what's happening here? Which is a pretty lonely place, and we're made to feel marginalized. You notice things you're not supposed to notice? Well, you're a conspiracy theorist. That's pretty much what you are. You can very easily be dismissed as just some kind of a gadfly or troublemaker. Okay, I know better. I think you probably know better as well. But that's just the way the world works. People don't want to see the systems that are wanting to rule us challenged. So they've been trained. Somebody speaks out, why, you smack them down quickly before whatever they're saying catches on. So in light of this, trying to make sense of what's happening in the world clearly is not getting easier. I found this article by Jeff Thomas. This was on LouRockwell.com today about manufactured uncertainty. And I thought, what an apropos term to describe what is happening around us. Now, Jeff Thomas says, for many years I've described a period that I envisaged to be in the future, in which much of what was considered normal would change dramatically. Anybody have that sense? Huh? Okay. The borders of some countries would change. The types of governments that ruled over them would change. In some cases, they would morph slowly into new entities. In others, they would change suddenly. And Jeff says much of the wealth in the world would change hands. Enormous fortunes would be made by a few, whilst the life savings of countless others would be lost. Large numbers of people would be on the move. Many would be refugees hoping to escape poverty and/or oppressive governments. Others would be opportunists, those who look for the positives in periods of global upset. But above all, this would be a period of change. For most people, this would one day be looked back upon as previous generations looked back on the World Wars or the Great Depression, a time of devastation in which many people lost all or much of what they had. But for some, especially those who foresaw the change, this period would one day be looked back upon as the time when their fortunes changed dramatically for the better. Now, Jeff Thomas says until recently, those who have predicted this dramatic change have been largely derided as doom and gloomers or end-of-the-world crackpots. And he says, it's been difficult to argue against this view, as regardless of how accurately we might have described what was headed our way, it was impossible to put a date on the onset of the crisis. Now, Jeff says he became convinced of its eventuality in 1999 due to economic and political developments that would result in a collapse at some point. But he said the speed at which this would occur and what governments and others would do to delay the eventuality could not be known in advance. In fact, he says the best I could do was to repeatedly advise that significant events would increase in velocity and magnitude the closer we came to the collapse. Now, Jeff Thomas says at that time, significant events were occurring once or twice a year. Since then, frequency has increased until today, significant events are occurring almost daily. And for those who've been following this line of thinking, the major premise is that the governments of the world, often acting in concert with the major banks and industries, have sought to expand their wealth and power in such a way that at some point, socioeconomic collapse would inevitably occur. And they've succeeded marvelously. For decades, they've dramatically increased their positions, but have reached the point at which the bill for the big party must be paid, and they have no intention of paying it. It will be passed to the hoi polloi, who will soon realize that it will break many of them, and they'll be hopping mad. So how should this moment be handled? Well, Jeff Thomas says historically the most effective means by which those who have caused the problem can not only get away with it, but profit even more from the collapse, is to create a distraction to take focus away from themselves as the guilty party. As any magician knows, there is no real magic. The trick is achieved through illusion. For a simple magic trick, a small distraction is needed. For a more elaborate trick to be pulled off, a larger distraction is necessary. But for a worldwide socioeconomic collapse to be pulled off, whilst the magicians remain in place to benefit from it, well, he says a major distraction is necessary. In fact, if at all possible, multiple distractions should be employed. Now, beginning in the early months of 2020, a virus has spread across the globe. This virus is familiar to science. It's a mutation of the coronavirus, which has been around 60 years or more. It's a common virus carrying with it relatively predictable symptoms and a relatively predictable outcome for those who contract it. Actual deaths are few and will occur mostly in those who are old and infirm or those whose immune systems are already compromised. But from the start, this virus was treated as a plague that would decimate the population. Almost immediately, the death figures were greatly exaggerated. The U.S. government even went so far as to award thousands of dollars to hospitals for each death that they attributed to the virus. Whole countries have been locked down, with millions of people losing their means of employment. In every case, essential freedoms have been removed from all citizens. At the same time, the death of a minor criminal at the hands of police sparked off a riot in a seemingly unrelated event. But courtesy of the media, the riots quickly spread across the U.S. in 40 of the 50 states. Incredibly, many mayors and governors stated that the rioters were justified in their unlawful actions and ordered police to stand down, exacerbating the riots. To make matters worse, it soon became apparent that many of the rioters were bussed into cities paid to cause as much destruction as possible. The funding for such groups has since been traced to plutocrats who created the problem in the first place. Jeff says in some locations, entire hotels in upper-class neighborhoods have been taken over by state governments to house homeless people, including the criminals, drug addicts, and prostitutes. These events have become so widespread that whole neighborhoods are emptying out of residents. He says the upset and confusion increases each day. The average person is now afraid to turn on the news each evening. But here's the point. He says we are witnessing a sleight of hand of epic proportions. We have entered the crisis period, and he says from here on in, wealth will be extracted from the populace on a wholesale level. In addition, inalienable rights are already becoming a thing of the past. The uncertainty that the average person is finding himself in is not an illusion, but nor is it an accident. And those who imagine that the powers that be exist to help them in their troubles will be the ones who are most dramatically damaged by this manufactured uncertainty. For they will live in the false hope that the very people who created the problem will come to their aid and save them. Jeff Thomas says nothing could be further from the truth. Yet just as those who are abused often turn to their abuser for protection, we shall see a populace that seeks salvation through a government upon which they bestow more power than before, not less. I'm sorry. This was not intended to be a feel-good article that I'm sharing here, but I think he's so on the money here. And it helps you to maintain perspective if you realize all the growing uncertainty around us is being manufactured. It is being promoted on purpose. The way the news is reported, the way that the Olympic opening ceremonies went, all of this stuff is calculated to shock us and to demoralize us and make us feel like, oh my gosh, it's getting hopeless. It's getting out of control. So here's the consideration that I'm going to ask you to look at. It's not hopeless. You're supposed to feel hopeless, and you're supposed to be on your knee begging, big mother or big brother or, the powers that be, please hear our cries. Please be godlike and save us. Now, the good news is there is a godlike power that loves us enough that he would save us if we'll humble ourselves and turn to him. So if you're looking to draw some strength, if you're looking to lean upon real power, I'm just telling you that's the direction you should be looking.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Hey, welcome back to the show. Final segment for today's show. And by the way, you can catch all of my show notes at thebryanhydeshow.com. These are the show notes for July 30th, 2024. You'll also find archived copies of the show. I know, maybe it's like, well, you say the same thing every day. I really try to find new or interesting ways to look at the things that are going on around us. There's a lot of great information out there. Sometimes it's hard to choose from it. I try to make it a part of my day to sift through and find the most useful, credible, principle-based information to share with my listeners. And I really have no idea how many listeners there are. I think there's a small core audience, but, I may be preaching to the same choir. If you encounter people in your day-to-day travels who are likewise on their way to getting their eyes open and starting to appreciate the situation around us, I'd greatly appreciate it if you could, just share with them, hey, here's a source or a resource that you might want to consider. Tell them about the show. Tell them, go to thebryanhydeshow.com. If they'd like to subscribe, it's easy to do at the bottom of the show notes page. You'll find a subscribe button, asks for your email. It's that simple. Doesn't cost you a thing. Although I will point out that I do have listeners who are regular financial contributors to this program, and I greatly appreciate and love them for doing so. I don't regularly ask for donations, but I appreciate those who just out of the kindness of their hearts or say, you know what, I see value in what you're doing and I want you to continue doing it. Thank you very much for those who do that. And I'll leave it at that. So, 3 quick things I want to share with you. The war on raw milk. I thought we had reached a point where, people, if they want raw milk, they can get it. If you don't, well, then don't. But now the same experts who brought us such hits as wear a mask or 6 feet of separation and the incomparable safe and effective. Now these same experts are saying, raw milk is a vector for bird flu, which I guess is the next big scare that they're going to throw at us. Anyway, there's a great article that I hope you'll take a look at. This is from Zero Hedge. Picked this one up yesterday. And again, if you feel like you can trust the COVID experts, then by all means, give heed to what they're saying. If you want to just see what they're saying and see why maybe they're trying to pull your leg again, this is a great article to help pull the curtain back on what they're doing. There's a great tweet in here from Thomas Massey calling out to Dr. Eric Feigelding and just tell him, dude, you are flat out lying and fear-mongering in this video. You just made up the 50% fatality number. You didn't explain it. You don't even know if pasteurization kills the bird flu virus. And Thomas Massey says people are not contracting fatal bird flu from consuming raw milk. But that's the impression that Dr. Feigelding is trying to get people to accept. I'm sure grateful for people like Congressman Thomas Massey. All right, another article here that I wanted to share with you. This is a great one from my friend Bryan Almon, who is the author and publisher of the Gem State Chronicle Substack. Laws or people, what really protects our freedom? Now, Bryan says if there's one naive concept held by conservatives, it's the idea that laws protect our rights. At least we have the Constitution, he says. You know, when we whistle past the graveyard, while government officials at every level censor our speech, lock us in our homes, and establish a tyranny that would have made Joseph Stalin blush. He's right, by the way. He says, ask yourself why Steve Bannon's in jail but Merrick Garland is free. Both men were charged with contempt of Congress, but such a charge requires action by the Department of Justice. And the Biden DOJ, led by Merrick Garland, decided to indict Bannon, but for some reason declined to indict Garland himself. In other words, the letter of the law didn't matter in the end. We are well into what paleoconservative author Sam Francis called anarcho-tyranny, where the law is used as a weapon against the regime's enemies, but a shield for those who act on its behalf. And listen to these examples that he gives here. The Biden administration is putting Christians who silently pray outside abortion clinics in prison, while pro-Palestinian rioters who attacked police officers last week had their charges dropped. Did you know that? Vandalized, monuments, tore down and burned American flags. Not that burning the flag necessarily needs to be illegal, but that was somebody else's property. Yeah, those charges are dropped. How about this one? Young men who left skid marks from a scooter on pride flag crosswalks, they're facing years in prison. Meanwhile, leftist protesters who vandalized statues and burned our flag face nothing. Illegal aliens whose very presence violates the law find protection from prosecution and are given free housing, food, and money while you struggle to pay your rent and buy groceries. And heaven forbid, do not make a mistake on your taxes or short the government on your taxes, or you'll be hearing from them. Look, totalitarians don't let things like laws and elections stop them from doing what they're doing. And Bryan Almon is correct here. This election in Venezuela, just a couple days ago, a stark demonstration that once the socialist left has control of the levers of power, they will use them to maintain their power indefinitely. Now, he's not saying that all is lost. He says the hour is too late to take our republic for granted anymore, but we can no longer afford to be mere spectators. So he says, let's get in the game and get to work. All right, one final article, and this is what I've saved this one for last because this is kind of a tough one. But I want to just put this out there for your consideration, and that is the idea that the difference between the mindless masses and the thoughtful individual comes down to a willingness to humble ourselves by asking hard questions. Now, you may think, oh, of course I ask myself hard questions. Do I want avocado toast or do I want coffee for breakfast? That's not the kind of hard questions I'm talking about. These are 21 difficult questions from Morgan Housel to humble yourself. And I've included a link in the show notes at thebryanhydeshow.com, show notes for July 30th, 2024. I'll just give you a small sampling of this, but if you are serious about knowing who you are and what you stand for, these are the kind of questions you've got to be willing to ask and contemplate and answer. And by their nature, they're hard questions. These are not easy questions. Why am I so awesome? Okay, well, let me think about that. No, let me give you an example here. One of the questions is, whose life do I admire that is secretly miserable? Or, what do I believe is true only because believing it puts me in good standing with my tribe? Ooh. I know, you just felt the whole mood shift. Wait a minute. Where'd all the air go from the room? How about this one? Which of my current values would be different if I was raised by different parents? What do I believe the most with the least amount of evidence of it being true? Now, these aren't questions to spark doubts. This is not like, hey, if you believe in God, this should make you doubt it. It's just about questioning your assumptions. And then guess what? We all have quite a few of them, apparently. How about who has the right answer, but I ignore it because they're a bad communicator? Who is full of it, but I pay attention to them because they're a good communicator? What do I think is ambition? In other words, a good trait, but is actually envy, a terrible one? What annoys me about other people that I sometimes do myself? Oof. Yeah. Sorry, that one stung. Ouch. How much of my nostalgia is a false or incomplete memory of the past? What in your profession is impossible to know no matter how smart you become? Here's a great one. Is this thing I'm worried about actually a problem, or am I looking for problems to worry about because they make me feel in control? What was true a generation ago that no longer is, and who's clinging to that old truth? What is partially true, but I believe in it so absolutely and take it so seriously that I've turned it into a dangerous belief? Are there things going well in my life today that I will look back on and wish I had quit while I was ahead? Is there something in my life I think I'm passionate about or focused on, but I'm actually just addicted to it? By the way, the answer to that question for a lot of people is going to be outrage. Think about that. If you have to log on to social media to vent your spleen, you might be addicted to it. How about this question? Do I spend more time defending what I already know instead of trying to learn something new? Are there people in my life who I consider kind and compassionate, but they're actually just too shy to tell me hard truths? I like this one too. What would Instagram look like if it were an honest reflection of people's lives instead of a curated highlight reel? Last but not least, am I being as nice as I could be rather than just as nice as I need to be? You need to check out the whole list of questions. Again, this is not to make you feel bad, although I guarantee you're going to feel some discomfort as you contemplate those questions, as you really think about them and start to answer them. You tend to learn a few things about yourself, not all of which are pleasant. But it's worth it if you want to really know yourself and know what you stand for. Check them out. They're at thebryanhydeshow.com. Show notes for July 30th, 2024. And you are welcome.
This is The Bryan Hyde Show.